So the idea for this talk came to me on a typical day. Actually, it really wasn't that typical a day. Well, actually, I was tracking a rhinoceros at the time, as one does. And it was my first rhinoceros tracking expedition ever. I was there with an American friend, and we were being taught by two master trackers from Africa. And as you know from your own rhinoceros tracking experience, when you're first learning, the ground is mesmerizing. You're like focused on these footprints obsessively. So I was not looking up until I saw peripherally one of my African friends tap my American friend on the shoulder, and then she did one of these. And then I went, because as much as I'd been focused on that rhinoceros, it never occurred to me that we might actually catch up with it. I looked up, and it was close enough that I could smell it, I could hear it breathing, and I thought I could pretty much spit on it if I tried. They tell you that time stops, and a whole bunch of things go through your mind. That's exactly what happened to me. So I'm going to put that rhinoceros on pause for a minute. Badoop, we can do that now. And I'm going to tell you what went through my mind. The first thing was that I have had over 20 years of formal education. And I swear, I scanned every second of it, and there was not one thing I had learned in school that was useful in this situation. In fact, it occurred to me, my education was really weird. I mean, here I was taken in with a bunch of same-age peers. We sat at these little identical desks. We stared at pieces of paper, and we tried to get the answers to questions that the teachers already knew. What? I mean, we evolved in rhino country. We evolved in southern Africa. The way the human brain works best is moving through nature, all five senses active, experimenting with real things to see if they work. Real science, not this sort of artificial environment. In fact, your schooling environment was invented right around the Industrial Revolution, and it had one purpose: to produce factory workers. People who could sit all day and just focus on doing one thing. That is not natural for a human being, not at all. Our nervous systems work best in a state of randomness. And in fact, the Industrial Revolution actually worked. It worked so well that we have developed technologies that have recreated a kind of randomness in our society that used to exist only in nature. So we're now facing overpopulation, we're facing destruction of ecological systems, we're facing climate change. We've created all that. Plus, our technologies are now undermining the very large corporations and government bureaucracies that once existed to create them. So you, with your smartphone, which is now off, can send a message to 1 billion people, which once would have taken a huge organization to accomplish. And that is just creating sweeping changes in our economic and social systems. Now, it is chaotic what's happening. We can't really predict it. And a lot of people are afraid of chaos because they think of it as just oblivion. But if you want to see chaos, go outside and look at the mountains, the trees. Look at your loved ones' faces. All these things were created by nature in a state of random chaos because it's not oblivion. It creates pattern disorder of such beauty, it is hardly imaginable, and of such complexity we can barely begin to understand it. And of all the things that nature has created, one of the most beautiful and most complex is the human brain. It further occurred to me, rhinoceros still there, it further occurred to me that I've spent the last several years of my life studying people who are abnormally good at navigating through nature using nothing but the human brain, not using the technologies of our industrial society. I'd studied wayfinders in the Pacific Ocean who were able to detect the presence of islands hundreds of miles away by doing things like analyzing the way the waves broke against the hulls of their canoes. I'd met plant shamans from the Amazon who knew the medicinal uses of tens of thousands of species of plants in numberless combinations. The people I was with that day were part of the group that I'd been studying. My American friend was a horse whisperer. You'll see her in a few minutes. I'd seen her take an animal so violent it was slated to be shot, and within 15 minutes turn it into a docile, gentle friend that followed her wherever she wanted. I'd seen my other friend, a Shangan tracker, pinpoint the location of a leopard 2 miles away in thick brush by listening to the pitch and direction of bird and monkey calls. My final friend in that group was part of a South African family that restores ecosystems, takes things that were devastated by human habitation, and then puts them back in a state of nature. To date, they have healed an expanse of land bigger than Switzerland, and they have no intention of stopping. Now, to me, all these people were magical, but only because, as Arthur C. Clarke says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So if you go into the cultures where a lot of these people are doing their stuff, you'll hear, oh, there's a magic person in the village. But if you talk to the actual person, they'll always say, magic, my ass. It took me 25 years to learn this stuff. This is what they see themselves almost as super coders of the huge computer that is the human brain, and they've just learned to code better than most people. And it takes a lot of work, so it is kind of a technology. And in fact, as I looked at all these different cultures and people who could do extraordinary things, very different, but very extraordinary things, I noticed that they were always using a pattern of 4 behavior categories and always in the same sequence all over the world. And I came to call these the technologies of magic. Again, not real magic, but something I don't understand. I don't understand my iPhone either. It's a magical technology to me too. So there's tons of magic in the world, and it's all science. So what I wanted to do today is just talk to you briefly about the 4 technologies of magic, because you did not learn them in school. And it'll be a little bit like me playing Mary Had a Little Lamb on the piano with one finger, as opposed to a concerto that might be played by a South American shaman. But even so, you'll hear the melody in it, and you will realize that there's something familiar about it because it comes installed on the hard drive of your brain, even if you've never opened the program. All right? So the first technology of magic is something I call wordlessness. And that simply means moving away from the verbal, rational, analytic part of the brain that your schooling taught you is the entirety of human thought. There's a psychologist named Jonathan Haidt who compares this rational part of the brain to a tiny little human sitting on the back of an enormous bull elephant, which is the remainder of the brain. Now, I have sat on a bull African elephant, and when you do that, you are sitting like this, looking way down at the tops of the heads of other people. There is no question that you have no control of this animal. That if it goes where you want it to, it is out of its good graces. Now, your education taught you to suppress that elephant and put the rider in charge, by God. In pre-modern societies, certain individuals chose to learn to teach the rider the language of the elephant, which is a non-verbal language. It's the language of perception and sensation. And it actually relies on sinking into a wordless state, which is far more observant than our usual tight focus on thinking, the stuff we were taught to do in school. Now, there are many, many ways to do this, and it takes years, various kinds of meditation, different practices in nature. But many of these cultures, a surprising number of them, use eye focus as the key element in turning on the wordless part of the brain. So I'm going to ask you to do this exercise. I sort of cobbled it together from a bunch of traditions. First, I want you to put your focus tightly on me, the way you've been focusing on teachers your entire life. Now, without moving your eyes at all, I want you to broaden the field of your attention until you can see everything all around me to the edges of your peripheral vision. And now, without moving your eyes, instead of making me be foreground, make everything equal, everything in your visual field. Now, continuing to keep your eyes on me, broaden your attention to include the feeling of your clothing and of your body sitting in the chair. Take a breath and include in your attention the taste and smell of the air. And then finally, I'll be quiet for just a second, and I want you to add everything you hear. Remember, everything you observe gets equal attention. Now, 2 things just happened when you did that. The first thing was that I saw your faces soften. And this is something we often see in non-industrial cultures. In fact, there's a famous story about an Indian chief telling the psychologist Carl Jung, he said, see how cruel the whites look? Their eyes have a staring expression. They're always seeking something. What are they seeking? We don't know what they want. We think they're all mad. Because it's crazy to go around in nature like this. Focused attention creates attentional blindness or inattentional blindness to everything we're not focusing upon. And if you do that in nature, you are cat food in like 15 minutes. Okay, so most non-industrial peoples go around with this soft facial expression. So that's one thing that happened. The second thing was that a deep stillness came into this room. And it wasn't just the stillness of a polite hush like you're holding now, it was an inner stillness. And if you explore that inner stillness far enough, you will find the second technology of magic, which is oneness. Oneness is simply the empirical observation that we are connected with everything in nature. Wisdom traditions have been telling us this all through history. Most recently, TEDster Jill Bolte Taylor, who's a Harvard neuroanatomist, described having a stroke at age 37 that caused her to lose the power of speech for several years. And while she was wordless, she later told us, she did not imagine, she perceived that we are all energy beings connected to one another through the consciousness of our right hemispheres. And if that's a little woo-woo for you, consider that right now at Duke University, there's a monkey who plays a computer game, except she doesn't have the panel for the computer game. That belongs to a man-sized robot, which is linked to her wirelessly and is obeying the commands of her brain as she imagines it playing the game. And it's responding faster than her own body would. And she's at Duke University. The robot is in Japan. Our bodies are electrical devices made of meat. There's no reason to assume that they can't be electrical wireless transmission devices. So the second technology of magic is just knowing that. And if you know that, you start to see things that boggle imagination, which is great because the third technology of magic is imagination. Now, imagination has very little place in a factory. Nobody cares if Ted on the line has an idea for a huge new widget. No, they just want him doing his job. But in nature, imagination is always the next step forward because in chaos, you don't know what's coming next. So you have to be able to imagine a response to something that's never existed before. And the ability to imagine something that never existed before seems to be uniquely human. It is a miraculous skill. And the way to use it is not to put your nose to the grindstone. Here's how the human brain was meant to imagine solutions to problems. You feed information to your brain through the rational, analytical, verbal part. And then when your brain starts to feel tired, you stop thinking about it. And you go out and do something else. You play, you rest, you sleep, you run. And it turns on the right side of the brain, the nonverbal portions of the brain, and unfamiliar connections begin to form. And when the brain, without your conscious knowledge, has come up with the solution, it pops it into your verbal awareness whole, like a bird laying an egg. Now, psychologists call this the eureka effect. After the mathematician Archimedes, he was puzzling over how to measure the mass of an irregular object, and he got so sick of the problem that he finally just knocked off and went to take a bath. And as he lowered himself into the water, he thought, oh, a body immersed in water displaces a body of water equal to its own mass. And he was so excited, he got up and he ran naked through the streets of Athens, screaming, I found it, eureka, eureka. And I'm sure his wife was at home going, honey, you find it every time you take off your toga. It's always there for you. And I could not be happier for you, but please calm down. But you know, it's not the calm people, the ordinary people, who make these huge conceptual leaps. It's the ones who are so excited they run naked through the streets. And they will keep doing crazy things until they create what they have imagined. And that's the fourth technology of magic. I call it forming. It just means creating in 3 dimensions a situation or object that you've imagined yourself. Think about how young animals learn so incredibly rapidly. That's because of a quality called neoteny, which means to stretch to include new things. And it's characteristic of all young birds and mammals, and they exercise it through play. Now, here is probably the coolest thing about being human. At some point in the distant past, some ape threw a clot genetically, and we ended up with a mutation that means we never outgrow neoteny. That's why we look like apes, but we look like baby apes. We have flat faces and small teeth and smaller musculature and less hair, but we also have that blazing fast brain of an infant throughout our lives, but only if we keep acting like babies. And what do babies do? They play until they feel like resting, and then they rest until they feel like playing. And that is the way geniuses move forward. That is the way huge problems are solved. People, right now, we have huge problems. Things like overpopulation, climate change, ecological destruction, these things are very real. They are potentially devastating, and they are close enough to spit on. So I'm going to take my rhino off pause, bloop, and tell you that she's still, it was a female, she still hasn't moved because all of this took place quickly in my mind, because my mind, when I saw the rhino, was jolted into its most efficient state, which was wordlessness, which is also timeless. So all of a sudden I was in deep wordlessness, and in that I felt a connection to the rhinoceros and to my three companions. And I realized that these three people knew how to use the technologies of magic. And I could feel a calm, a stillness emanating from them as they imagined this crisis ending well. And just after I felt it, I saw the rhinoceros go, and she walked away this way, and we walked away that way. And that was the end. Kind of an anticlimax. But isn't that the way we want all real life crises to end? You guys, if we want the crises we now face to end well, we need to harness the entire intelligence of the human mind, not just the rational little slice, but the vast, complex, chaotic brilliance that sages have been learning and teaching each other from time out of mind. You know, you've done your time as a cog in a machine. You've done that, you learned it, you're good at it, you got it. Now can you stretch to include something new? Are you willing to drop into the wild stillness of the wordless mind until you feel your oneness with all things? Are you willing to imagine something so crazy nobody's ever thought it before, and then push it into form, even if it means you have to play until you feel like resting and rest until you feel like playing for the remainder of your days on this earth? Are you willing to try that? I hope so. Because it may be your contribution that pulls us all back from the brink of destruction and helps us fix what we have broken. Please, for the sake of your own life, for the sake of all life, give it a try. Thank you.